As yet another Pride Month comes to a close, one night I stared out my window while taking in the beauty of my neighbors fighting over their children's custody, and to my surprise, God spoke to me directly again, and the Lord spake thus.
Francis, another Pride Month hath come and gone, and here you stand. Thou hast not hit thy quota of criticizing capitalism or the identity politics that are rampant within thy community.
I shook my head. Then I smiled. Wouldn't you know it? The old man was right again. June is almost over, and I have practically nothing to show for it. What was I to do? How could I atone? Greetings, my good bitches. The name's Francis. QueenCokeFrancis. I'm an editor, Twitch streamer, drag artist, and I'm here because, hi, I'd like to talk to you about our Lord and Savior, Chapelle Roan. I am so late to the party on Chapelle Roan. Girl has me transcending. A lesbian drag queen who writes songs about messy, complicated feelings is now a mainstream pop star. She's not just gay famous, she's famous, and she did it all without pandering to the algorithm or the male gaze, unlike, some people. And in many ways, she symbolizes how queerness in pop culture has gotten so much better over just like the past 10 years. Which brings me to the topic of this video. We may be living in a phenomenon right now, but I want to reflect on a phenomenon I witnessed during my queer coming of age. Specifically a product of the early to mid 2010s, where we saw sizable leaps and bounds in the advancement of gay rights, as well as a very specific kind of pop culture that shifted radically after a curious little thing happened in November of 2016. In case you don't know, I love coining words for things. It makes me feel like I've actually contributed something of value to society. I work with voice actors as my day job, and I play a lot of video games, so I've coined a term that I like to call Xander-Mobus syndrome. The phenomenon where a person's voice sounds way hotter than the person providing it. The few times you do hear Joker's voice in Persona 5, it definitely doesn't sound like it came out of this guy. No offense, Xander. There are probably other voice actors who are way more deserving of the title. He just happened to be the one that stuck, poor guy. So I recently coined a term for a very specific type of person that came from that era I just mentioned. So grab some poppers and strap in for another Pride Month video as we examine the rise and fall of what I like to call the Buzzfeed Gay. But before we do, if you are a fan of watching a very tired drag queen talk about nerd shit forever, I ask that you please work yourself to the bone for that very special promotion in your company. But when they suddenly decide to lay you off for tax purposes, storm into the executive offices and go ahead and unzip your pants and dick slap those like and subscribe buttons as hard as you can. Special thanks to Vox, BBC, Think by NBC, New York Times, PBS, Washington Post, BET, Harvard Business Review, and the Brown Daily Herald as sources. Oh, and my own eyes and memory. So firstly, let's define what a Buzzfeed Gay really is. Buzzfeed Gay. Noun. 1. A usually cisgender and/or white homosexual male celebrated for his ability to advance upwards in a capitalist society while keeping his homosexuality palatable enough for mainstream and/or heterosexual communities. 2. A symbol of centrist identity politics that reflects the Obama-era advancements of gay rights, usually on a superficial level. Now, I know what you're thinking. Francis, that's an awful lot of words just to say Pete Buttigieg. Just kidding. We do need more representation for boring gay people. I think the 2020s are actually starting to come through with that. In the meantime, let's do a quick recap on queer representation in media, culture, and politics during this era that Gen Z loves to roast us for because they think it's cringe. It is cringe. It's super cringe. I'm gonna get into that later. Pop culture in the 2010s can absolutely be defined as one that put a spotlight on diversity and inclusion, especially especially for queer voices, people of color, and body positivity. And it was extremely necessary following the homophobia, transphobia, racism, and rampant body shaming from the 90s and 2000s. Like, it is still fresh in my mind where it was perfectly acceptable to call Britney Spears a whale for looking like this. And I'm not even 30. With the rise of social media came more visibility. More people talking openly about their gender and sexuality made people who were questioning feel less alone and felt more encouraged to come out themselves. More visibility also meant more reactions, both positive and negative, which we will get into later. More and more celebrities, household names even, began to come out as queer or trans. The Babadook might be the most iconic gay figure in my lifetime. If Caitlyn Jenner wasn't such an absolute dog shit pick-me bitch, I'd be a lot more motivated to talk about how monumental it was when she appeared on the cover of Vogue. I was more of a Laverne Cox bitch myself, but hey, our increasing visibility came in the form of something I and many others had been waiting for a very long time. Queer characters simply being present in media without it being treated as a spectacle or as part of the story. We were finally being shown as just regular ass people, and media that did outright bring up our gender and sexuality was increasingly positive. That said, there is something about those Hays Code era gay villains that I honestly miss. I think we should bring them back. I think it's time we reminded everybody the monsters that we really are. Not only were there more gay and trans characters, there were gay and trans actors portraying those characters. And there was a growing backlash against cishet actors being cast in those roles. Gay and trans characters began appearing in children's media, much to the dismay of Matt Walsh, who I'm sure is just devastated that he can't jerk off to them anymore. By the way, in case you're wondering where that accusation comes from, just Google Matt Walsh 16-year-olds and have fun. We reclaimed the word queer. We defined terms like non-binary or cisgender. Oh, giddy buggity, Elon Musk, the cisgenders are coming after you. Queer musical artists exploded, especially after Queen Gaga's rightful ascension to her throne. We also had a growing number of cishet allies like Macklemore who used their platforms to uplift disenfranchised groups. Too bad that Thrift Shop song goes harder than anything else he ever dropped, but hey. In short, this was the decade where gay went mainstream. I'll put a link to it in the description box, but I recommend checking out my video about why I stopped watching RuPaul's Drag Race, where I go much further into depth about the pros and cons of gay going mainstream, and I'm lazy and don't feel like repeating myself. But I do want to briefly touch on a key ingredient in the creation of the Buzzfeed Gay, which is the increase in gay media made for straight people, aka yassification. Visibility means accessibility. Accessibility leads to education. Education leads to understanding. Understanding leads to acceptance. But, and there's always a big old juicy but, when queerness goes mainstream, capitalism begins to take a stranglehold on queer media, and it decides what is or isn't going to be profitable. And for something to be profitable, it has to be palatable, meaning queer and trans identities are more likely to be reduced and sanitized so that it's easier for general audience consumption. Gay and trans people worked really fucking hard to create a culture that was unique to them. And listen, people can say whatever they want. Language is language. I'm not going to police what people can or can't say because fuck cops. But when a bunch of slang and buzzwords we've all heard on Drag Race or whatever are commodified, that culture is erased, all for the purposes of consumption.
It's not just for gays anymore.
So, with the shift in media came a shift in politics. This was the decade where a lot of people, for lack of a better word, like changed their minds, I guess. At least in my own personal experience and what I witnessed growing up, I think the passing of Prop 8 in California was a big wake-up call for a lot of people. For such a discriminatory act to be passed in liberal-ass California of all places. Granted, gay marriage is barely scratching scratching the surface of equal rights. It was around this time where slogans like "love is love" and "love wins" became popular. Love is universal, and it's a concept that's easy to understand for ignorant folks who maybe didn't realize that gay rights were that big of a deal. Or for the bigots who realized, fucking surprise, there are gay and trans people in your life that you care about and deserve to be treated as human beings. I had whiplash from how quickly so many people changed their tunes on queer people from the time I came out to the day I graduated high school. And in a way, despite all the bullying and lost friendships that I had to endure back then, I'm kind of grateful that I did live during a time that was less accepting, because it made me appreciate that change that much more, if that makes sense. I know that's actually a pretty privileged take, so you know. However, 2008 also marked the election of the first African-American president in US history. No matter how you feel about Barack Obama, you cannot deny that this was a pretty big fucking deal. He had an uncomfortably anti-gay voting record, but he did change his tune, albeit superficially, upon his election and re-election. After 8 years of Bush, 8 years of Clinton, 4 years of another Bush, and 8 years of the literal Satan incarnate during the AIDS crisis, having a president who promised to do anything to improve our quality of life was very much appreciated. Now, I'm just gonna come out and say it, and I'm sure the white liberals watching this will be very upset with me, but I don't think Barack Obama was a great president. He definitely wasn't the worst, but I don't think he was a good one either. Granted, he had to deal with an inordinate amount of racism and pushback from the right, but even on his own, he was a symptom of the growing cancer of neoliberalism and all the hypocrisy and empty promises that came with it. But it would be disingenuous to not acknowledge the fact that during his presidency, more measures were put into place to help protect LGBTQ people from being discriminated against in the workplace. Gay marriage was legalized, and Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed. I've always felt kind of iffy about that last one, because it's like, okay, cool, gay people can serve in the military now, so we can go and die like everyone else. But again, that is a personal decision, and everybody should have the right to make it. These advancements are significant, and they should not be ignored or taken for granted. But they also exposed some fault lines in the greater fight for LGBTQ rights. Significant? Yes. Revolutionary? Debatable. 2019 marked the 50-year anniversary of the night Marsha P. Johnson, a black trans woman, threw a brick at a cop car, and was the beginning of the revolution where gay and trans people finally gave heteronormative society the finger. Now, 2015 marked the release of Stonewall, a Roland Emmerich dickfuck travesty of a film where all the key players in that historical moment were replaced with this Sigma Alpha Epsilon looking ass crew. If it makes you feel any better, it only has 9% on Rotten Tomatoes and only made $112,000, so woo. Progress. But these fault lines grew as time went on and our visibility increased. One of the most notable examples was when trans activist Genesis Gutierrez was booed after she interrupted Obama's Pride Month speech. But she wasn't throwing like Marjorie Taylor Greene heckles at him or anything. She was trying to raise awareness for the trans immigrants that were detained at the border that was a result of Obama's border policy at the time. And as you all know, got worse over time with each president that came after him. But this kind of hostility and dismissal towards activists who are fighting for intersectionality extended past the White House, and it proved that the gay rights movement was one that still primarily benefited cisgender white gay men. White gay people were fighting for marriage and military rights, while queer and trans people of color were fighting for survival. However, the fight for intersectionality did continue to rise as more and more people saw the disparities between white gay men and literally everybody else. The 2010s also spawned movements like Black Lives Matter, Me Too, women's marches, climate activism, Occupy Wall Street, March for Our Lives. It's such a shame that Dan Savage has a track record of being extremely ignorant towards trans people and Muslims, because I witnessed the It Gets Better project save people's lives. Plus his monumental success in changing the definition of Santorum for him. God damn it, Dan. Let's celebrate Daniel Radcliffe and his work with the Trevor Project instead. Let's celebrate Daniel Radcliffe, period. Apparently, everybody has an awesome Daniel Radcliffe story except me, so if you have an awesome Daniel Radcliffe story, by all means, please say so in the comments. Ultimately, at this point in history, we weren't where we wanted to be, but things had gotten better in a lot of ways, and it would be disingenuous to say otherwise. Now get ready for me to make a whole video saying otherwise. With the rise in visibility came, unsurprisingly, a rising backlash and a new wave of hatred towards the queer and trans communities. Not that it didn't exist beforehand, obviously. J.K. Rowling is doing the exact same thing to trans people that Anita Bryant did to gay people back in the 70s. It just mutated with the rise of social media and internet culture, and as much as I hate to even bring him up, the Trump presidency. Not even so much from Trump himself, more so from his riled up base and his sycophants who were finally given permission to be as openly hateful as they wanted to be. And the people who work with him who hate him, but for some reason are too scared to stand up to an 80-year-old in declining health. Oh, and this very princess who got her job by carrying Trump's purse around for him. God, I only wish the worst for John McEntee. The rise of Republican fundamentalism began to push neoliberals even farther right, and the pushback from the left on neoliberalism was stronger than ever as we watched our rights get systematically stripped away while the left in Congress stood by and did nothing. And a lot of this was foreshadowed by the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando in 2016, which left 49 people dead. And everything's pretty much gone downhill from there. Although the guy who shot up a different gay bar a couple years ago and then he like pretended to be non-binary so that they would give him a lesser sentence, he was just sentenced to 55 consecutive life sentences and then a bunch of others because he had like other felonies. So, you know, I love good news. The fight for queer and trans rights might have been knocked down a bit, but it got back up, and we will never not get back up. But we started receiving help in a way that wasn't really wanted or needed. And because this is a QueenCokeFrancis video, this is where that bitch capitalism comes in. In the 1960s, gay bars were the only places where gay and trans people could exist without the fear of harassment or mockery or violence. The night a few undercover cops tried to take that away from them was the last straw. Pride Month was founded upon throwing bricks at cop cars. If you're someone who objects to people saying no cops at Pride, please shut the fuck up and listen, because this is exactly why. Pride is fundamentally intended to disrupt heteronormativity. To simply exist as a queer or trans person is an act of rebellion, which is why it was so confusing in the middle to latter half of the 2010s when I would go to Target with a hangover and an enduring hatred of screaming children and see that every single brand had dick slapped a rainbow on their products as hard as they could. Or I'd log on to the Dumb Bird app. Don't forget, this was back when being Twitter verified meant that you were a legitimate person or business or institution and not a neo-Nazi with $8 a month to spare. And nearly every business, every corporation, and nearly every government institution had changed their profile pictures to, well, the exact same thing, but like rainbow this time. And this, my good bitches, as you probably already know, is what's called rainbow capitalism. Now, I might be a drag queen, I might be a non-binary bisexual drag queen, but as you can plainly see, I am also a white drag queen. And as much as I firmly object to cops being at Pride, I'm not the demographic that suffers the most consequences from Pride being bogarted by neoliberal pinkwashing that disproportionately harms queer people of color. So instead, I'd like to read you a passage from an article by Deshaun Harrison, a black non-binary abolitionist and activist from Atlanta. As it usually is, whenever I quote somebody else, it's because they sum up my point better than I ever could. Believe it or not, I'm a dumbass. If you don't believe me, watch my Twitch streams. Rainbow capitalism, also referred to as pink capitalism, is a term used to detail the allusion to incorporation of LGBTQIA+ rights into corporations with profit incentives. Solidarity from these corporations has extended to gay marriage, but not abolition of the police. Corporations like Nike, Walmart, and Jack Daniels announce countless rainbow-colored products every year while investing in private prisons, slave labor, and ignoring the higher rate at which LGBTQIA+ people suffer from substance abuse. Instead, it is a fest meant to center, cater, and in many ways pander to cisgender, thin, white, gay men, people who have always been most protected in our community. Black LGBTQ+ people, who are oftentimes beaten, raped, and brutalized by police, do not benefit from having them at Pride, especially since Pride was a response to these same violences afflicted upon our bodies. But on the other hand, and I honestly didn't even think of this until somebody brought this up in the comment section on another one of my videos, because of all the right-wing backlash and whiny piss babies who never touch grass and whose kids will never speak to them ever again, we're now at the point where companies are scared to do anything for Pride Month. And what's extra depressing is that it's highly doubtful that they're pulling Pride merch for the sake of actually protecting people. They're pulling it because they think the opinions of bigots matter and because it's not profitable. This keeps getting worse, don't it? There's endless discourse on rainbow capitalism, and I don't want to spend too much time talking about it, but I had to because it's an important part of the equation I'm putting together for later. I'm doing math for the first time ever. Isn't that exciting, you guys? But something I don't see brought up very often is another phenomenon that happened during the 2010s, which is commonly known as the gay wage gap. According to Harvard Business Review and a study by Vanderbilt, reports from 2013 to 2017 found that gay men make about 10% more income on average than their straight counterparts. Lesbians made about 9% more, and bisexual men and women earned less than both, which I can confirm. Definitely not from my own experience or anything. And, unsurprisingly, people of color made less than all of the above. Now, these numbers are affected not only by race, but by age and the presence of a partner and the size of their families. There's also the division of labor to take into account if a couple has kids. From the research I've been able to gather, there isn't really a clear answer as to why the gay wage gap exists, but the most plausible theory that I found is that rich people are simply more comfortable coming out. No disrespect, NPH, you're still the real hero. But I want to talk about yet another phenomenon that was a product of the evolution of capitalism in the 2010s that we all know. She was everywhere. She's more or less nothing but a meme now. And Ashley from The Boys. If we're going to get into the rise and fall of the Buzzfeed Gay, we first need to examine his female counterpart, the rise and fall of the girl boss.
Disney's been trying to recruit me for years, and I am a goddamn girl boss.
The definition of a girl boss was a financially successful, self-made woman who runs or leads her own company, usually used as an empowering term for women who succeeded in the face of misogyny in industries that are primarily dominated by men. And she was everywhere in the 2010s. Everyone wanted to be a girl boss. True feminism was being part of the hustle. Equality was finally here, and being a hard-working minority was finally gonna pay off. But the women who popularized the term were eventually knocked down by the people working underneath them, seizing the means of production and all that hot girl shit. Nasty Gal CEO Sophia Amoruso was sued for illegally firing employees and fostering a toxic workplace. Away co-CEO Steph Curry was alleged to have bullied employees and didn't provide the diverse and inclusive space that she had boasted about. The Wing founder Audrey Gelman stepped down after allegations of their black and brown employees being severely mistreated and the feminist social space being entirely for show. Glossier, Refinery 29, Man Repeller, Vogue, SoulCycle, you name it. All companies ran predominantly by wealthy white women. All ran by girl bosses. By calling out their their hypocrisy and slowly but surely chipping away at the girl boss facade, they revealed it to be nothing more than an aggressively unrelatable capitalist power fantasy. The entire culture of girl bossing was just a co-opt of female empowerment for the sake of profit. It's good old-fashioned crony capitalism, but with a pussy hat on it. It perpetuated the false idea of making working conditions better for women and closing the wage gap, ultimately with the end goal of making one feel better about consumerism.
Some cockroaches in IT tried to unionize, so I just called an exterminator.
What was that?
Oh, negotiations. Bye!
Power and money are measures of equality in capitalism. And this exact same culture extended to gay men for the exact same reason. Hard work as a minority was paying off, and the climb up the corporate ladder was suddenly something to be celebrated because it was disguised with "Yas, honey," in the words of the great Audre Lorde. For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us temporarily to beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. So, you've been watching this for God knows how many minutes, and you're probably thinking, Francis, we already know this. You are not the prophet you think you are as you sit there in your ivory tower. Where the hell does Buzzfeed factor into all this? First off, I am a prophet, that's why I roasted John McEntee before John Oliver did. Second of all, what a coincidence. I was totally about to get to that, I promise. We all remember Buzzfeed, right? I mean, it's still around, but it's not the buzz that it used to be. Oh my god, please bully me for making that pun. I hate myself. Part of BuzzFeed's decline could be attributed to that one mediocre white dude who cheated on his wife or something and everybody lost their minds. I don't know. BuzzFeed was an interesting beast because on one hand, it was just mindless entertainment and listicles, or quizzes where you would build your ideal Chipotle burrito and they would try and guess the size of your dick or something. But it also became a legitimate, albeit left-leaning news source. There were times where BuzzFeed, of all things, would provide a more comprehensive and sometimes less biased report than even CNN. Definitely more than Fox News. And it constantly rode that fine line, and that fine line is what made it its own special thing. As it grew, BuzzFeed fostered a uniquely millennial corporate culture that became synonymous with early 2010s progressive rhetoric. At one point, you couldn't meet a single millennial who didn't at least kinda want to work for BuzzFeed. Dude, I wanted to work for BuzzFeed really bad. Granted, I was 22 and I hated myself, but by presenting news and op-eds in a simple, digestible, easy to read format, while also balancing itself out with stupid shit, BuzzFeed was the place where a lot of people heard terms like patriarchy and white privilege for the first time. In a pretty genius move, BuzzFeed was one of the first corporations to make social justice profitable. But no matter how much lip service is paid in regards to social justice, profits will always, always, always come first. And the former employees at BuzzFeed started to feel pretty disillusioned with the company they had dreamed of working for, only to find out that it was just another vehicle for toxic white identity politics that took advantage of their labor.
With all companies, culture is set at the top. This is every company. I loved my job and I gave my job everything. Yeah. This is coming from a place of a deep sense of hurt that someplace that I loved so much did not love me in return.
Corporate office culture is corporate office culture, no matter what generation it's ran by. Regardless if a CEO decided to get rid of cubicles, no amount of custom coffee mugs or sweet green lunches or midday yoga exercises can be thrown your way to make you forget that you're working for a corporation that makes videos of women painting with their own period blood in order to sell $34 pairs of leak-proof menstruation underwear. Now, from what I've been able to research, BuzzFeed doesn't seem to be explicitly discriminatory towards any particular group. But according to testimonies from former creators and employees, it can be argued that identity politics played a big part in shaping the kind of progressive image they wanted to convey. Again, this is a business. Profits will always, always, always come first. It doesn't matter matter how many disenfranchised groups you put on a pedestal if you're overworking and exploiting them behind the cameras.
I am a fat queer woman. We check boxes. And when we check boxes, we are a benefit to a company.
I think the quiet part loud was that, like, the company, I think sometimes, like, took credit for being like, look, we have these women, these diverse women working for us and thriving under us, right? Like, there was some clout that came with having people like us working for them, right?
Kristen and Jen from the Kitchen and Jordan show were just two of countless creators who joined the Why I Left Buzzfeed phenomenon. Why I Left Buzzfeed is practically its own genre on YouTube at this point, and I watched a lot of them when I was doing research for this video. Several of them brought up the fact that there are certain things that they're not allowed to talk about, which alone is super shady, but they all seem to echo the same grievance. These creators were worked nearly to death, despite the fact that they were what made BuzzFeed what it was in the first place and received very little in return. Again, even if BuzzFeed isn't outright bigoted or discriminatory, it's still just a larger symptom of everything we just talked about. Oh, and it gets extra gross. The Why I Left BuzzFeed bandwagon became so big that there are now Why I Left BuzzFeed videos on the BuzzFeed YouTube channel. Like, they actually decided to capitalize off of former employees who were exposing their shady business practices and are now wearing it like a badge of honor. And it's giving this.
I had inappropriate relations with a sweet young man, but that young man, he was 15 years old. But the moment of my greatest weakness was also the moment that pushed me to my eternal salvation.
Alright, promised you all I was going to attempt math. I'm going to attempt math. Here we go. I flunked pre-calculus. According to my calculations, positive strides in gay rights plus rainbow capitalism plus girl bossing equals yassification times toxic corporate millennial culture plus for-profit social justice squared equals the Buzzfeed Gay. So where is the Buzzfeed Gay now in 2024? He's still around, for sure, just not with the same reverence he had a decade ago. And the fall of the Buzzfeed Gay happened for the exact same reason that the fall of the girl boss did. Unless you're in a pyramid scheme, she still hangs out in those circles. Now that's a downfall. But we're smarter than corporations think we are. We found better ways to uplift queer and trans communities without simping for capitalism. We've learned to see past meaningless identity politics while still striving for greater queer representation. And this has heavily affected pop culture as a whole, just as it did in the last decade. Because in addition to our changing attitudes on what makes meaningful social justice, we need to recognize another major factor here. Cringe. Here's a passage from a Vox article by Constance Grady that really nails where this 2010s cringe comes from, and again, saying my point better than I ever could. Lin-Manuel Miranda gazing out at the audience with misty eyes at the end of Hamilton. Cringe. Grown adults debating their Hogwarts houses. Cringe. An article in which fictional character Leslie Knope shares words of comfort after Donald Trump's 2016 election on this very website. So cringe. Yet there's also something about precisely which relics of Obama-era pop culture have come in for special reviling in 2021. They're not necessarily associated with Obama himself. Instead, they are all media that tends to celebrate people who worked through the grind of bureaucracy to make their great achievements. Media much venerated for their identity politics of representation. Media with a firm but vague political identity of liberal centrism. They are, in short, media that celebrates the qualities associated with our collective pop cultural understanding of Hillary Clinton. The latter half of the 2010s had shifted so rapidly that the characters and archetypes that we once aspired to seemed unattainable, distant, unrelatable, cogs in the machine that symbolized a greater problem. Since Hillary Clinton's defeat at the hands of Donald Trump, pop culture's support of her and her specific hardworking archetype has waned. What distinguished the wholesome pop culture of the Trump era was that it that seem to be starting from zero. While pop culture's Hillarys tended to be presented as fully cooked good people whom we could all emulate, in the Trump era, wholesome pop culture tended to center itself around fundamentally flawed people who are trying to be good and not always succeeding. The girl boss is cringe. Millennial culture is cringe. Corporate pandering is cringe. Liberal centrism is cringe. Office culture is cringe. The Buzzfeed Gay is so goddamn cringe. And that's the main cause for the downfall, in my opinion. But cringe is so important to how we grow as people and as a society. As the great Trixie Mattel once said, if you look at yourself from a year ago and you don't cringe, you haven't improved as a person. Anyway, happy fucking Pride Month. Here's your daily reminder to drink water, eat something, recite positive affirmations, take your Pratt, clean your apartments, tell your pets they're awesome, whatever you gotta do. You're awesome, and you're beautiful, and you deserve to be here, and your butt looks fantastic.
You're perfect, you're beautiful, you look like Linda Evangelista, you're a model.
And do you know what else is awesome and beautiful and fantastic? The winning comment from the last video. And there were a lot. So I picked the one that my partner laughed at the hardest. Beetle Queen 1732 says, I love how big your lashes are, and that makes me trust you implicitly. But seriously, thank you so much for all the love on my last video. I have no idea why that was the one that finally blew up. I've been on YouTube for 3 years now as of this month, and I really, really appreciate you guys helping to make the algorithm gods finally bless me. My favorite part of it was how many of the artists actually showed up in the comments. Thank you so much for being there. Thank you so much for watching. You guys are so talented, and like I was legitimately starstruck to meet you all in the comment section. Never underestimate the power of Yowie fans. The other thing is like, where do I go from here? Because Mr. Bircham Yowie is so specific. So if you guys have any suggestions on what you would like to see from me, please let me know. Because yeah, I make these for myself, but I mostly make them for other people's enjoyment. So if there's something you want me to talk about or do or whatever, please just let me know. I will be happy to maybe consider it, maybe. You too could be featured in the next video. Leave a comment below. I will pick my favorite one somehow and give you a shout out next time and pin your comment to the top of the comment section. If you would like to see me simp for my favorite game characters and get visibly frustrated in real time, please follow me and my beautiful co-producer Mitchell on Twitch. We stream most Sundays Pacific Standard Time, and we are still raising money for the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund. If you would like to see even more of my clown mug elsewhere, please consider following me on Instagram or TikTok. My handle for all of the above is at QueenCokeFrancis. If you enjoyed this video and you haven't done so already, please work yourself to the bone for that very special promotion at your company. But when they decide to suddenly lay you off for tax purposes, storm into the executive offices and go ahead and unzip your pants and dick slap those like and subscribe buttons as hard as you can. And of course, as always, until next time, in case you didn't see it, yeah,